Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this last session of our online event on science communication and boosting diversity in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So this is the last session of our online symposium, which is called Moving Forward. And we will have two speakers, James Tooze from the Campaign for Science and Engineering, and Clio Heslop from the British Science Association. These two talk and a respective question will be followed by an overall panel discussion around all the talk and all the discussion we have had so far, but bringing them together, hopefully, to get some general insight. So we're going to start with the first presentation by James Tooze. So James is a policy officer at CASE, who works across all areas of policy. He was the author of CASE's latest report called Inspiring Innovation, which looks at how the provisions of science education in school can equip all young people with the skill to take part in research and innovation. Just to remind everyone that if you want to ask any question, whether during, for each speaker after their talk or during the overall panel discussion, please use the Q&A function of Zoom. So James, if you're ready, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks very much, Natalie. Really pleased to be here, and thanks to the ZSL for having me today. So yeah, I'm James from CASE Campaign for Science and Engineering, and my talk is going to be all around making STEM careers advice inclusive for all young people. I thought I'd give a quick intro to CASE, as some people might not be familiar with us. CASE started as a grassroots organisation in the 1980s, following funding cuts to science and a brain drain of academics, in particular to continental Europe and the US from the UK. So about 1,000 academics clubbed together, took out an advert in the Times newspaper saying that politicians need to stand up and save British science, and that was the birth of CASE as an organisation. We've evolved a little bit since then. We still have a real strong base of individual scientists and engineers within our membership, but we're much more focused on organisations now. We have about 120 different organisations within our membership. They range from universities, large corporate industrial bodies, learned and professional societies, including ZSL, and then a smattering of others, medical research charities, science parks, science centres. And really our mission as an organisation is to look holistically across all of the policy levers that the government holds that ultimately affect scientists and engineers across the UK. That includes investment in research, as you can imagine, not only from the public purse, but also how to incentivise private investment from the UK and abroad. Education and skills, which fits nicely in with today, sort of alongside domestic education. We do work on immigration, things like that. And then I guess a final strand is the championing the use of scientific evidence in policy making, not necessarily through ourselves, but trying to ensure that there are the facilities and frameworks for good, solid scientific evidence to be, I guess, be able to be used in the policymaking process, and that all government departments have the facility to understand and take on scientific evidence within the policymaking process. So I've recently been fortunate enough to work with lots of domestic education experts across the UK over the last sort of 18 months to work on a new report for CASE, which has been really great for me, and I've really enjoyed it. Really looking at, I guess, science education in particular in secondary schools and in primary schools, thinking about how a scientific education can not only equip young people with some really important skills, whether they decide to become a scientist or not, but also in how you can try and bridge the gap between those who are more fortunate and those who are far less fortunate in terms of what they feel like they are capable of doing, and how you can begin to try and I guess make education, and particularly in this case careers advice, equitable right across all parts of the UK to all different people. I'm sure you will have heard a lot this week about there being no real one silver bullet to help to increase diversity and inclusion within science. I think one of the things that became really clear when speaking to a number of people is actually the power of careers advice, and not just formal careers advice as we might have previously thought of people who are approaching the age of 16 and thinking about what they were going to do after school. I think the importance of showing children that from a real early age that anything can be for them, science can be for them, and how you can sort of begin to inspire that confidence and that spark that interest, I guess, within children from really young ages is incredibly important. From a policy perspective, case again as an organisation that tries to look right across the policy piece, there's rightly been a really big push in the business department over the last, I guess, year or so, particularly by the Science Minister Amanda Soloway, to think about how you can create a more diverse and inclusive research workforce. And I think for us as an organisation, that really starts from an early age. I think there are clearly more steps to be taken to enhance the range of opportunities to people once they get to a postdoctoral and beyond career stage. But ultimately, if you start with a small pool of people from then you're probably not going to achieve what you set out to. And I think it's incredibly important that that this plays a big role in thinking about the experience you give to young children, and how they might view STEM more generally, and also, I guess, careers in STEM in the future. So I guess I'd touch on a few different things that I think really robust and solid careers education really throughout school can do. One of those really being dispelling stereotypes and promoting role models for young people right across the UK. CASE recently partners with Engineering UK and a few other organisations to look at careers education in England in particular, and interviewing people from right across the country. And really one of the key barriers that was cited for really everybody, I think, right across gender balance. I think there was quite a lot to show that across people who had special educational needs and were neurodiverse, ethnically diverse as well. There was a real barrier in terms of looking at the role models that were promoted, and people potentially feeling like that science wasn't for them, because I think the stereotypes of what a scientist is and what a scientist does really perpetuated through. I think as an example, Teach First have recently done a survey of the GCSE double awards science curriculum that showed that I think of 42 named scientists, either their names or sort of phenomena that they give their name to, 40 of those were male and only 2 of those were female scientists. Of course, that's not necessarily done by design, but I think those are the kind of things, again, that really don't help in showing a really broad range of people that science is, they can be a scientist, and what a scientist is or does. Now, I mean, there are some really good examples of work in this area in promoting role models and STEM learning. Who have the STEM Ambassador program is really fantastic. Very fantastic example of that, where young scientists in particular will go into schools and talk a little bit about what they do. Now, of course, that again is really limited by who wants to sign up, who the volunteers are, and where they live geographically. So again, I think that's something that is kind of a theme throughout some of this, some of my other slides I've got here. I guess the other thing which kind of really covers a lot of this is thinking about science capital. And I guess when I say science capital, I mean the comfort with science, the, I guess, affinity towards science, and how comfortable you might feel when talking about science or understanding what science is. And again, it's a real it's a great separator of people in their own individual lived experiences, and particularly when you're a child, you are obviously influenced by the people you're closest to and their experiences. I think the stat there kind of shows that children who have parents who work in science are far more likely to be encouraged to take up STEM activities than those who aren't. And I think ultimately, then, if you can create better opportunities for learning about science, better opportunities to be inspired by people within a school, that is potentially a way to try and close the gap, I guess, between the people who are really encouraged from a young age by their parents and those who might not otherwise be. And that, I guess, really feeds into this next one about equalizing information, and I think a robust careers provision and careers inspiration right throughout school is a really important way in trying to address some inequalities that exist. I think Aspires, a program that have been running out of KCL, have shown that actually some of the areas in which you probably will need a lot more support for careers education are the types of places where it's not necessarily always present, and those again are the kinds of things that can further entrench disadvantages, particularly between those from disadvantaged backgrounds. I think there's another stat there from Engineering UK. Again, it shows that again, I think the access to information is really a way to breed confidence in young people, a feeling like an understanding of what a scientist, or in this case an engineer, does, is actually really powerful in inspiring them and motivating them to become a scientist or an engineer. And that again remains a really important issue to tackle. And I think with a lens to future careers and inspiring people to think about careers from a young age, that can really make a big difference in trying to show that science, engineering, technology, maths can be for anybody. And I think again the issue of sometimes again the stereotype about STEM is that you have to be really academically bright, and while that probably is largely is the case, there is still a whole range of opportunities of which people can undertake to get into a career in science. I think again from a personal perspective, thinking about individual experiences of the world and their own lived experiences, careers inspiration that has a sort of local lens is really important. I think there is a lot that particularly large industrial organizations undertake in terms of outreach in local schools. I think about EDF and sort of Hinkley Point and those kinds of things, where there's a significant local employer who can go out and give a real picture of how someone might become involved in that kind of job in the future. And again, that sort of tangible experience has actually been shown to be really important in terms of showing young children that these kinds of things are open to them and they're more than capable of doing. These, I think I've listed a few here, the sort of careers services that are throughout the UK. Again, are sort of good examples of where this kind of resource is available, to the links to real world and experiences that they can give to their schools. But of course, that's really up to a school on a school by school basis if they want to interact with those kind of organisations or not. And yeah, it roots into STEM here. I think I've kind of broadly touched on this already, but I think it's incredibly important that it's not just about saying to people that they have to go to university to be part of the STEM community, that's the only route in. So I think again it's really important to equip schools with the ability to talk about the whole range of routes that people can undertake to eventually become working I guess the STEM industry. So I guess I've talked kind of rambled now about the opportunities that really good and strong careers advice can help to give, but I think it's important to reflect on how those improvements can be made. I think certainly from literature and the understanding of the world, children as young as 7 start to think about what they might be able to do, and crucially what they might not be able to do in terms of future careers. So I think that shows that it's incredibly important not to think about careers advice as something as I guess an afterthought when children are either starting to leave school or considering their next options. I think by then without any sort of careers inspiration, careers education, it's really difficult to make sure that you can capture the whole range of people who might otherwise be interested in the sort of STEM career or exploring where they could go further. And I guess that comes again with the next point there, an increased emphasis on inspiration. Inspiring that generation is incredibly important, and I think there's been a lot over the last few years to show that children are increasingly interested in the world around them. I don't think that sort of curiosity is something that necessarily ever leaves anybody, but I think really there can be more to be done to ensure that curiosity and that interest is captured, and again the understanding of what they might learn in school, what they might be interested in outside of school, and what can potentially be a future for them to allow children to kind of continue to be interested is really important. Opportunities for training really is all about I guess empowering leaders in school in particular to provide opportunities to both careers leaders, STEM leaders, teachers in general to receive training about to be confident to talk about the full range of opportunities that are available in STEM. I think it's really unrealistic. It's probably unrealistic to say that all teachers will be able to understand and articulate the full range of opportunities in science. Again, I think that comes from a confidence of sort of lived experience and your knowledge of that area, particularly primary school science teachers. I think at the last count about 5% had a sort of science qualification beyond an A level. So I think it remains really important that that teachers can have the opportunities again to learn about these things, to be able to disseminate that through to their classrooms. And I think that the support that's required for them is incredibly important, and something I guess I'll touch on in a little bit. And then a kind of a question is the last point here: are school league tables driving behaviour? And really, that's I guess a reflection on the importance that is placed on school league tables in terms of thinking about where their children end up after school, and that potentially driving behaviour to encourage young people to go to university when that's not necessarily what they want to do because it looks good for the school. I think that's a discussion point that's been raised to me before. I'm quite interested in sort of exploring further. But again, I think that kind of feeds into steps to be taken, I guess. Thinking about how some of these can actually be put into practice. And I guess maybe I'll take that middle point first in reflecting on the point about school league tables. I think ultimately schools are always going to be held accountable for a certain number of things, and at the moment careers advice is not one of those things. And that's, I think it's completely understandable that schools have so many things that they need to do for young people, and they prioritize the things in which they're held to account over. But I think from my perspective and others I've spoken to, actually careers advice is incredibly important, because the school education can give you so much, but ultimately it's preparing you for the world, and actually having schools be made accountable over the careers advice and provision they give is really important, alongside actually giving them the resource to be able to deliver that. I guess again that sort of feeds into the first point, really embedding careers inspiration into the curriculum. I think some of the things I talked about before about embedding real world examples of where these things can, where the science lessons that they might have in schools could lead them in the future. A broader idea of what scientists and engineers are and look like. I think again dispelling some of those stereotypes is really important within that, and ensuring that the curriculum shows a real diversity and inclusivity within the research workforce as it is, to encourage young people to still continue to take up their interest in STEM and in science in schools, and then finally increase the resource for regional careers hubs as a really important point in being able to provide the same offer to schools wherever they exist, whatever their size, whatever the intake of students as it is. I think that's currently really it's up to the schools to be able to say, well, do we have time for this? Is this a real priority for us? In and amongst everything else we have to deliver, and I think giving more resource to careers hubs to be able to go out into every school and give the same offer remains really important. I'm not sure how I'm doing for time. I don't know if I've either gone over or drastically under, but that's I think that's sort of the end of my formal presentation. I just want to again say thanks to the ZSL for having me today.
No, thank you, James. It's perfect on time. We have a number of questions for you, but I might just give you the time to unshare your screen, if that's okay. But before we move to Isla for the question, I may ask you one quite specific question. But so this report comes with a lot of recommendation. How does CASE go on to make sure that those recommendations are followed? So what are the possibility to change things following that report?
Yeah, I think actually in this sense, it's really us trying to build momentum behind the importance of some of these issues and think about them within the overall context of the UK government in particular's agenda. The UK government is been really determined in saying it wants to make the UK a science superpower, which is really important. And I think it's our role. We see it as our role to be able to articulate the range of policy levers that they need to act upon. In order to make that happen. I think there are lots of plans in place at the moment about investing in research, which are incredibly important, and we're behind. But I think really in terms of thinking about sustainability in the long term for UK research and having a really talented and diverse pipeline of people coming into the research workforce is ultimately what's going to be able to leave a legacy for this work. So for CASE, it's really about using government momentum, but also trying to build broader support, politically, also with departments such as the Business Department, Department for Education, in trying to make progress. And I think not, as I said, not think about things in isolation. Think, I guess, holistically about what really is required for a sort of thriving science and engineering sector.
Thank you. Isla, I know we have quite some questions, so I'll let you lead on this.
Thanks, Natalie. Yeah, we've got a few here from Q&A. Just a reminder for anyone that joined late, if you've got a question, please type it into the Q&A box. So the first one is, do you think it's important for children to meet scientists in person rather than find role models they've been taught about but never met?
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's really important. I think, fortunately, children from a younger age can be more impressionable, and I think if you can give them the personal access to individual researchers or whoever, then that's incredibly important. And again, I think if you can show them that scientists can also be young people who might look like them and come from where they come from, is being incredibly important. I think I mentioned the STEM Ambassadors program before, but that is a really fantastic way where particularly young researchers will volunteer to go into schools and speak to classes about what they do and inspire them. I think is incredibly important. So yeah, I would definitely agree.
Thanks. And we've got another one which says, if it's largely up to schools to decide if they provide students the opportunity to meet scientists and people working in STEM, do you think the government should mandate the type of opportunities into the curriculum?
Well, yeah, I think certainly. I think it is incredibly important to make sure that again, children have the access to these kind of things, and it's not really a nice to have afterthought at the end. Again, I think I don't want to make it come across like schools aren't doing a good job with this. I think they just have a lot on their plate, and often it can be up to school leaders to take initiative in the direction in these sorts of things. And so I think ultimately giving schools the ability to be able to do this more often, whether that's provision of support or even just a list of people who give these sorts of activities out and try and minimize those kind of issues. I think there are really all sorts of things that can affect it. I mean, even thinking about having to get parents to sign permission slips to take kids out of schools and travel costs and all that sort of stuff is actually has a much bigger effect on the access to these sorts of either visits or school trips out. So I think increasing the sort of provision with which schools can use to undertake these sorts of activities is really important as well.
And we've got one that's a bit related to that one, which is, how can schools in rural areas have access to scientists as speakers, especially as many rural or remote communities have fewer children going to university? Yeah,
no, I think that's really important. And I think there are, well, again, in our partnership we've recently held with Engineering UK, we're starting to think a little bit about how, I guess, an increasingly blended or hybrid model of teaching that's had to take place over the last year or so with the pandemic. How you can potentially bring the benefits that sort of blended online and in-person learning can have on kids' experiences. I think again the ZSL have done lots of outreach activity and lots of other organisations who can do that. And I think if schools can sort of retain some of the capability with which they've had to embrace over the last year or so to be able to access a wider range of people from potentially much further away, then that is a way where again, geography might not have to be such a massive issue as potentially it has been in the past.
Great, and then we've got one last one which says, do you think sorting secondary school students into sets in science based on math scores from primary school puts them off STEM?
I think I don't know. It's quite a difficult one. Without knowing too much about how that affects people, I think what will remain really important is making sure that I think people aren't put off or dissuaded in saying that I'm not very good at this, and that ultimately being a barrier to them pursuing what they want to pursue. And I think again, if children are being setted, it remains really important that that the teachers, whoever's teaching them, I guess in secondary school you'd have subject specialists, but them having a really good idea of, well, okay, there are still a really wide range of opportunities that could be available to you. You don't necessarily have to get straight A's to be a scientist. And I think that continuing to show people that, I guess, the broad range of opportunities that could be available to them without necessarily having to go through university to work in STEM is kind of a really important way in trying to make sure that you don't lose people from an early age.
Okay, that's everything from me.
Thank you very much, Isla, and thank you very much, James.
Thanks.
So now we're going to move to our second speaker, Clio, from the British Science Association. So Clio is the Partnership and Impact Manager at the British Science Association, where she works on policy, professional network, audience research training, and organizational development relating to equality, diversity, and inclusion. She leads the BSA's work with other science engagement professionals and organizations, and how to support the field to be more innovative, sustainable, and outward-looking. Clio is also a science engagement researcher and practitioner with interest in training, network, and collaboration. So today's Clio's talk is entitled "At the Heart of What We Do, Working Toward the Strategy for EDI and Science Engagement." Clio, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Natalie, Isla, Ike, and all the team at IOZ for inviting me along. And yes, looking forward to sharing with you this morning. So I'll speak a little bit about all of the BSA's, the British Science Association's activity in equality, diversity and inclusion, the EDI, and also about the kind of broader changes that we're trying to help facilitate across science communication practice and in society. So what I'm going to do is just start with a bit of an introduction to the British Science Association and who we are as an organisation. And then I'll talk a little bit more about our activities and what we're doing at the moment. So we are, we've got quite a long history. So we're coming up to 190 years old as an organisation. We were founded to kind of bring science out to people who may not have had the opportunity to experience it yet. So at the time of our founding, science was something that happened very much within the kind of highest sections of society, and you had to often have access to money or be part of particular clubs or social circles to access science. And the BSA was created in order to take science out to the regions and to people that hadn't had a chance to really experience the kind of developments that were happening very quickly in our country at that time. And so we've really carried that throughout our history as our main kind of vision and mission of a world where science is at the heart of society and culture. And we want science to be available and inclusive to all people. So we're quite lucky that we have this very broad remit, and that allows us to do work across education, policy, science communication and engagement. And we're also kind of not attached to any like strong one strong motivation to do this. So we believe there are a lot of really good reasons why science communication and engagement is important. So there's some listed here, which are, you know, personal decision making, collective decision making, creating a kind of strong science workforce and therefore a kind of stronger economy, and also just sharing the kind of enjoyment and cultural benefits that science has to offer. So this is the kind of reason for BSA coming into being. And over the next few slides, I'll talk a little bit more about why we specifically decided that we had to focus much more on equality, diversity and inclusion. So in 2015, we started doing some audience research. We'd run representative surveys of the UK public age 16 plus to think about how people experience science. So this was a little bit linked to the science capital work that James was talking about earlier, where we were really interested in how people form a science identity. And the key thing was this: we were looking at adult identity around science, not necessarily in a school setting. And so we were less interested in how people's parents, families, and kind of environment and school environment shape their views, and more just generally about how they see science as part of themselves. And through those surveys, we split the UK public roughly into 4 groups. So people that are professionally involved in science, science is their job, and that's a really kind of strong connection to science. People that feel very engaged in science and that actively seek it out, that attend festivals, events, and kind of look for science news and science content as something that they personally enjoy and feel part of already. And then this huge group in the middle, around 50% of the population, that have quite a passive, inactive relationship with science. So they're interested but don't make an effort to seek it out. And then around a quarter of the population that would just say that they're not interested. And we were using these groupings as a kind of strategic tool for the BSA. We were thinking, where do we think is most important to focus our organisation's activities? And we really felt that we needed to do much more work with people that don't have an active relationship with science. So people in the 2 left-hand groups there, they're not interested in the inactive. And our aim with those people, you can see the diagram splits in 2, and our aim was not necessarily for them to all become professional scientists, but for them to either be engaged or just feel more involved. So where EDI comes into this is, as soon as we started looking in more detail about our audience research, we noticed that the people that were professionally involved in science or very engaged in science tended to also have a lot of general societal privilege. So they were much more likely to be white, to be male, to be from kind of more comfortably wealthy backgrounds, to be educated to a higher level. Whereas the people in the 2 groups on the left hand were much less likely, the not interested and inactive groups were much less likely to have general kind of societal privilege. And so to us, that sent a really strong message that if we are really truly invested in a more kind of culturally and socially engaged model of science, then we also need to work very actively around improving diversity in STEM, improving inclusivity of STEM. You know, if we kept focusing on the same kinds of people, we're increasing the divide, we're making the world worse, which we absolutely did not want to do. And so a few years down the line, I would say that our work kind of falls into about 5 different areas around equality, diversity and inclusion. We've been really lucky in that we've had a bit of funding to support this. So the Wellcome Trust awarded the BSA a Sustaining Excellence Grant in 2018, which has really helped us accelerate this work. So the first thing that we did was really about our internal policies and processes. So we wanted the BSA itself to be a more diverse and inclusive organisation. We wanted to make sure that our programmes and activities were more reflective of a broader UK audience and people that haven't necessarily engaged with science before. And we wanted to actively involve those people in setting our priorities and designing the programmes for themselves. We wanted to make sure that, you know, that we're an organisation, because we've been around so long mainly, and we've been running science engagement programs for so long, we're an organisation that lots of people look to. So we wanted to use a bit of that to say, okay, this is what we've tried on equality, diversity and inclusion, you know, spread a bit of the learning, and that's something that we're hoping to do more of in the next few months. And then finally, we have a kind of increasing profile in policy as well. So we really wanted to make sure that we could use that profile and that kind of power that the BSA have to start advocating for policy change, as well as in the delivery of our own programmes. So I'll give an example of each of these 5 areas over the next few slides, and then we'll stop and have time for Q&A. So first of all, I just want to talk a little bit about the work that we've done internally with our own staff. So it's not just been about kind of hiring and recruitment and retention, which is really important, but and making the BSA a more diverse workplace. But we also thought it was really, really important that if we were making a big commitment to EDI, that all of our staff had to feel confident and capable of talking about it, seeing it as a part of their jobs, and not kind of add on to their work, like, oh gosh, now I've got to think about also how I'm going to make my event accessible, as well as everything else that comes with organising an event. We wanted it to be one of the first things that people thought about rather than one of the last things. So we did lots of formal and informal things with staff. So we set up an EDI reading group for people to share and discuss different EDI topics. So we talked about things like privilege and ableism, and kind of just had quite kind of broad, very open conversations about these things and kind of learning together. And then we did some more formal training with staff around particular skills that we felt were going to be important for people over the next few months and years. We also found as a starting point that some of the frameworks that are available, the Royal Academy of Engineering have a great one that sort of help you just see where your organisation is at in terms of equality, diversity and inclusion, and help you to plan different areas where you might need to make small or big changes. So for example, it'll help you think through your communications and how inclusive they are, or your governance structures. And we found that really systematic approach was a very helpful starting point for us. Some of them we've moved away from now, but it definitely kind of sped up our progress, and it's a good way to be accountable if you're in an organisation that has, you know, senior management and trustees that need to be able to measure some progress. Those frameworks are really good. And we did a lot of work trying to consolidate some of our data on staff and recruitment. We also set up some structures internally, so an advisory board of people that could support our progress and answer questions as they came up, and again, be a bit of a friend to our senior management who are quite new to this area, and also looked across some of our other things like progression and appraisals and how EDI could be built into that. So for example, you know, you have to show in each of your annual appraisals, you have to show what you're doing in terms of EDI. So that's our kind of internal work. And I think people really underestimate how much work this is. This was taking up a lot of our time and resource, but I think it's been very well spent. So I'll go through now a few examples of our externally facing work on EDI, and just relating this back to the topic of this conversation around strategy and putting EDI across everything that we're doing and really at the heart of what we're doing. I think these examples kind of show how we've kind of built it up piece by piece. So the first one I'll give is quite a kind of light touch example from British Science Week, which is a programme we've run for years and years and years. It's a national campaign, so it's quite, the BSA doesn't organise loads of activities. We provide a kind of platform for lots of other people to do activities in Science Week. And we created this new campaign called Smashing Stereotypes, which encourages STEM employees and researchers to share their stories, their experiences of working within STEM, and also just to highlight people that are not, I wouldn't say overlooked, but don't fit the kind of typical stereotypical mold of what a scientist looks like or behaves like, or, you know, trying to uncover a little bit more about who scientists actually are and what they do. So this was, again, quite a simple campaign, simple idea, but it's been really popular, and an example of quite a small step that we made just to one of our existing programs. I'll talk a little bit more now about some kind of bigger structural changes we've made to our programs. So one example is community engagement, where we've really shifted all of our science engagement activities away from BSA control, I guess is the best way to explain it. So we're very much arm's length with a lot of our engagement activities now. We give out small grants directly to people in communities and community groups that are not well represented or have been historically marginalized within science and science engagement, and we say, you just do something during Science Week or during the Science Festival to provide for your community. And over the past few years, we've then kind of built up that program to develop community leaders who now feel much more confident running their own science engagement activities for their own audiences, and we've started buddying them up with researchers. And if anyone's interested, I think there's a call out at the moment for researchers to be involved in a community buddy scheme, just to start to build those relationships and start to make more people feel included within science communication. So I think before we started this work, we probably wouldn't have thought of like, you know, youth club in Hull as being part of the science communication sector. But the BSA is really trying to take all those groups on that journey and say, like, you know, this needs to be available to everyone. And as I say, that does also involve the BSA stepping aside and saying, you know what your communities want much better than we do. And so sometimes the activities don't look obviously sciencey, but you know, that's a journey that we help them on over a number of years. And then related to that, but on a much larger scale, we're starting to think about, so one of the biggest areas of science communication engagement that probably all of us have had some experience of is grant giving, and applying for grants to do engagement activities. And the BSA at the moment is running a scheme called the Ideas Fund, which is again trying to extend that community-led model across grant making, and with much kind of bigger sums of money, and giving that money to people that have been historically excluded from science engagement. So people that that again just wouldn't necessarily have thought of themselves as science people or science organizations, but we really want some of their questions, concerns, ideas about science to be reflected better in the kind of science engagement activity that's happening across the UK. So this is quite a new programme, just launched this year, and will continue for another year as a pilot, and then hopefully extend more into the future. And so, as I mentioned earlier, we're also thinking about partnerships. So this symposium is a really great example of an organisation like IOZ or ZSL trying to share some of their knowledge and experience around diversity and inclusion with a wider group of people that they're connected to. And again, this is something that the BSA is really interested in. So we've started small with like a small network of science engagement organisations who we know who've applied to us for some support for their own EDI activities. And we just have a quarterly network meetings where we discuss what we've been doing. And I think it's really important with this because EDI work, it does take time and commitment, and it's often, you feel like you're the only one in your organisation that's doing it in some cases. So we're starting to try and connect people together from different areas to learn together and share, and even things like recommending training or resources. It can be really, really helpful. So that's another thing we're doing. And again, we're sort of slowly starting to build EDI into all of our activities and all of our strategies. And we've been a kind of convener of science engagement for a long time. And so we're trying to think about, okay, what does it look like if EDI is central to that? The final thing I'll talk about is a policy example, which is an all-party parliamentary group for diversity and inclusion in STEM. So the BSA were asked to be secretariat for this group. Again, about 4 years ago, and an all-party parliamentary group, it's hard to explain. It doesn't have formal policy making power, but it's like a kind of club area forum for members and officers who represent UK Parliament, so people from members of the House of Lords or the House of Commons who have an interest in a particular area, to come together and to learn about it and suggest policy changes. So there are loads of APPGs on things like, you know, areas of food and drink, different countries, different technologies, and the BSA is secretariat for this one, focusing on diversity and inclusion in STEM. And what we've done so far with this group is organise 2 inquiries, one on equity in STEM education and one on equity in the STEM workforce, which I was hoping I'd be able to give you more detail about, but we're actually due to release it in a couple of weeks' time. and I'll just run through the kinds of things that this group has focused on so far and what we've been doing. So it's really important to mention, first of all, that these recommendations and activities, they come from the all-party parliamentary group. They don't come from the BSA. The BSA is secretariat for the group, but we represent the members and officers and the evidence that is submitted to the inquiries. So these aren't necessarily all, you know, it's not the BSA saying these things, which is quite helpful to us from a kind of influencing point of view. But of course, these are all things that the BSA fully agrees with and supports. So I think, again, underpinning all of this work was the all-party parliamentary group. We really wanted to take an intersectional approach that we felt had been a bit missing in some policy and in some kind of policy and advocacy around diversity and inclusion in STEM. A lot of it had focused previously on a particular protected characteristic. So for example, STEM and gender or STEM and ethnicity. But we really wanted to use the all-party parliamentary group to think more broadly about the kind of multiple barriers that people experience in school and in work in sciencey environments. So our education inquiry reported last year, and the 5 kind of main things that we asked for were, first of all, we wanted ministerial responsibility for equity in education. We wanted there to be someone in the Department for Education that was responsible for thinking about inclusivity in schools. And we've put that to the Education Minister. We got a brief response, but this is something that I think we'll continue to ask for. We also asked for the STEM education for the curriculum to be more relevant to all young people and the experiences of science schools to be much broader, I think, as James mentioned in his talk, very similar to that. Much more action on teacher shortages and better support for teaching, better careers guidance, which again, James mentioned in a lot of detail, so I won't do too much there, and a review of the GCSE STEM, GCSE science pathway, which seems to create a lot of tension and inequity. And it's hard to see exactly what effect that's having. So we asked for a really in-depth review of what happens when you split students into triple and dual award science, and what effect that has on their future careers, future prospects in STEM, and what kind of inequities are arising from that. And then, as I say, in a couple of weeks' time, we'll report our workforce inquiry. And there's some information available on the APPG website already, and a mailing list you can sign up for to get a copy of the report as soon as it's available. But really, we're expecting it to cover about what we know about STEM workforce and EDI and where there are data gaps. That was a huge issue about people, the way people collect and report data on their workforce, and even as far as like not really being able to define what a STEM job is. So we think that there's probably a lot of work to do there. Also kind of areas of structural inequity in STEM workplaces. We're likely to mention that quite a lot in the report about, as I say, the kinds of barriers and experiences people are having that support them or dissuade them from continuing in STEM. And a huge thing is the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on the STEM workforce and what the workforce of the future is going to look like. Because I think maybe some of you have experienced, there's been huge levels of disruption, especially for people on short-term contracts or in research roles that require them to be publishing, have access to all the laboratories, all of these things that have been really disrupted by the pandemic. So we're likely to think a little bit about what needs to be done next. So just to finish off there, like I said, I've given you a few examples of the BSA's work and trying to embed EDI across what we're doing. We really want to think much more about routes into science and communication and engagement careers. So ensuring our workplaces are inclusive and that we're providing opportunities to all people to be involved in science and engagement as a job. building that trust and partnerships with diverse audiences, so through our grant giving and the way that we run our activities, and just starting to work more in partnership with people who haven't been involved in science before, kind of trying to be open about what we're learning and how, and then that kind of making the case for wider change, so that kind of policy shifts or kind of behavioural and practice shifts that we think might be needed. And then finally, I just thought I'd give like a few kind of pointers for people that might be thinking about doing some of this work themselves. Yeah, so firstly, thinking really clearly about what is motivating your work on EDI. So for us, it was very mission-led, as I mentioned, but for some people, it might be about business benefits, or it might be a kind of moral focus on equality, diversity, and inclusion. I would say start with yourselves and your organization, make sure that everything's kind of fit for purpose, and that the people in your organization know enough about EDI to be able to talk about it reasonably confidently, to be able to answer questions and ask questions, so that you can build some momentum across your whole organization. Start with things that you're doing already and just try out small steps, like I mentioned, that British Science Week campaign. Make sure that you've got some kind of senior support and external advice set up. So for us, that was an advisory group, but it might just be a couple of people that you ask to proofread or to give advice on projects. And then finally, I would just say that small changes add up. Lots of people that I talk to in the network, for example, start to feel a bit disheartened when they feel like, oh, all we've really done since our last meeting is run a training program. It's like, yeah, but we just need to keep going. And yeah, these are all small steps, but I think keeping EDI high on the agenda and just continually thinking about it across all of our activities is going to be really important going forward. So I'm going to stop there and take some questions, and yeah, thank you very much. I left my contact details, and do sign up for APPG updates, or there's a few nice reports also that the BSA has just published on our community engagement as well.
Thank you so much, Clio. So what will happen now is that we're going to take all the question for Clio, and then, as many of you will have seen, many of our panelists from this session, the previous session, has joined too. So we're going to open the panel discussion after the question for Clio. So Clio, I know we have quite some questions, so I'll pass to Isla.
Thanks, Natalie. Yeah, quite a lot of questions through from the Q&A. So first one is, why is it important to have both an internal and an external approach to embedding EDI values?
I think it differs for different organizations. I think for us, it was all about authenticity and acknowledging that we have, we're an organization that's been around a long time, and, historically, we've been kind of part of structures of science that have been excluding people. And our internal work was really about trying to undo some of that. So trying to set up our organization in a way that was more inclusive, but also, I think, as I say, that kind of staff confidence and ability to participate in EDI initiatives has been really important. So for example, this is something that my team has been doing and thinking about for a long time, but we need our comms team to be able to have the right terminology, feel confident that they're using it. We don't want to be proofreading their tweets every day. You need to set up your organization in a way that thinking about equality, diversity, inclusion is kind of second nature. So for us, it was quite a kind of operational approach, I guess. We wanted to be able to get on and do the work efficiently. But I also do think there's something around authenticity and making sure that you feel like it's coming from a kind of informed and reflective place.
Thank you. And then we've got one that says, how many schools engage with British Science Week?
Oh my goodness, I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. It's a lot. Our comms and education team are absolutely rushed off their feet. I think in, you know, yeah, I'd have to come back to you, but I know that our British Science Week activity packs and resources get downloads in the tens of thousands, I think. So it's fairly big, and I think in the last few years it's really reached across school stages as well. It used to be more of a kind of secondary school, and now it's really like we've really brought it through into primary school and even early years. So
great,
it's a bit of a beast.
And can you tell us more about how the Community Buddies program works?
Yes, so Community Buddies, it is set up as a kind of relationship building exercise between researchers and community leaders. So our community leaders, there's usually 10 to 12 people based in different UK locations that are that represent particular kind of small community groups. So yeah, it might be around a health activity, or it might be that they share a faith or a language. And the BSA, the people that the BSA have been working with for a number of years. And what we do is we ask researchers who live in similar areas to those people, and there is a fairly decent UK spread. So we ask researchers who live nearby to get in touch with us if they're interested in being paired up with someone from a local community group. And we leave it really open-ended. So all we do is just say, why don't you just have a chat, get to know each other? We help facilitate that. And then maybe have another chat in a month's time and see, this time think about if there might be a project that you're both interested in. And then, you know, and then we just kind of very slowly take steps towards maybe you'd like to actually apply for some funding to do that project together. So it's quite slow burn. And actually, if after they've met a couple of times and they think it's been great to connect, but we're probably not going to work together, then that's fine as well. But yes, I can share a link with you afterwards if anyone's interested.
Great, thanks. We will post some blogs on the ZSL website afterwards, so that would be a good thing to share as well.
Yeah.
Then we've got one which says, how do you think GCSE science could work better?
Oh gosh, I need to get my head back into that report, which I haven't really looked at for a year. But so I think the main things are, number one, the curriculum as a whole. I think more emphasis on practical work and the kind of day-to-day experiences people have of science. The application of science to real-world problems and challenges could be much stronger. But what we really saw was issues, I think someone mentioned in the previous Q&A, around not just sets and setting of students, but selecting which students take triple award science and which students take double award science. There's some real issues there. Like that's without speaking for hours and hours on it. There's a lot of inequalities in the data that show up where the kind of students that are seen as more academically talented or bright are put straight into triple science, and therefore their A-level prospects are broader, their university prospects are broader, and people that for whatever reason are seen as less academically gifted, or for whatever reasons have had to take time out of school or have had exclusions from school, directed towards double award science, which then can kind of cut off opportunities for them later down the line. So there's something about that process that needs to change. We had some suggestions were that like everyone should do triple science, like get rid of the double, get rid of there being two options. But we didn't have enough evidence to confidently say that that was the best thing to do. So that's why we asked for a review rather than straight away just say get rid of double. But yeah, I know it's an area that still lots of people are working on. Louise Archer's group at Institute of Education that do the science capital work that James was talking about. They're doing a lot of work on it. And also, I believe the Royal Academy of Engineering in the next couple of weeks are publishing a report that they've done in collaboration with Lewis Hamilton, the racing driver. And he's really interested particularly in Black students' experience of STEM subjects at school. So I think that's likely to come up in their report as well.
Great. And how receptive has the government been to your recommendations as a whole?
Well, we did try and influence them at quite a bad time because it was in the middle of the pandemic. Yeah, we got a note from Gavin Williamson to say that he'd read it. Yeah, I think there's so many changes happening in education at the moment that it's going to be hard to get anything solid for the next few months at least. But let's see, we'll keep going. I do think the workforce report that we're going to release in the next couple of weeks might gain some more traction. As James said, there's a real strategic focus on science in the government at the moment. And we hope that's an opportunity to say you really need to look at the diversity of your workforce and how you're going to support that if you want UK to be this kind of science superpower, as they keep saying.
And that, I mean, you've half answered our final question, which is, has Brexit and COVID been a barrier to your policy work?
A little bit. It's more, yeah, with the education report, it was just, in some ways it was really good timing because loads of people were talking about experiences in schools and inequity caused by the pandemic, and so we could kind of get on that. But for example, we had to delay publishing that report for quite a long time because of Brexit, because the political agenda was so cluttered by Brexit. So we wanted to report in end of 2019, but at that point, you know, Brexit bill was taking up a lot of time, and then there was the general election, and so it's things like that. It's sort of annoying timelines, and you know, and then this current report that we want to get out before the summer recess, and then COVID is still like so high on the policy agenda. So it's just a slightly awkward parliamentary timeline more than those topics themselves. Yeah, but it's just something that you have to learn to work with often.
Thanks, Clio. That's all the questions.
Thank you so much, Clio. So if I could ask all the panelists to turn on their video. So welcome back. It's really nice to have you back. Hello, Kerry from London Zoo, Alfredo from Pride in STEM, Danny Rabaiotti from the Zoological Society of London, Karen Devine from British Ecological Society, Nicholas Bone from the Tactile Universe, Serian Sumner from Subbox Science, and welcome all. So for this last part of the event, we have some general questions that we'd like all of you to pitch in. So please either get your hands up, or if you're really techie, use the hand thingy on the, I'll probably see both. But it would be really nice to have your perspective as a group on some of the issues that were raised during this symposium. And the first one that I really would like to have everyone's opinion on is, to which extent are you actually confident that the current effort that are made by the scientific community to engage with the public, with science, is actually improving diversity in the STEM workforce? So who's going to go first? You need to give me yeah, Danny. Yes,
I'll go first. I'm not especially confident. This is a bit of a bummer, really, isn't it? But I think it's only really just starting in a lot of science, and I can only really speak for ecology because that's like the field I do the most work in. But we're so far behind other sectors that, you know, this is like baby steps. So I think there's a lot of will, and I hope that people get it right, but I do worry that sometimes if we don't take the time to like make sure that, you know, particularly that we are putting forward role models that look and sound like the people we're wanting to inspire into the field, that actually it can have the opposite effect. So I do have concerns, but I do think that there is a lot of positive change happening. So that's the positive side of it.
Karen.
Sorry, I was so busy lowering my hand. To follow on from what Danny said, I think Danny's right, is that the ecological sector is really quite far behind. I think science generally is not particularly diverse. However, it's our undergraduate summer school next week, and when we look at the EDI data, then actually 12% of individuals do identify as an ethnicity which is not white. A really good proportion of individuals identify as LGBTQ+. A really good proportion of individuals identify as having either a visible or invisible disability. So whilst I think that we are a really long way behind, I do think momentum is starting to build. I think the key thing for me across a lot of the diversity discussions is how we maintain the momentum. I think Black Lives Matters is a really good example. There was a huge amount of momentum and it's slowly waned a bit. And there's had to be a really proactive kind of process of saying, let's not let this die away. Let's actually keep actively working on this and talking about this. So I would say that Danny's right, but I can see some glimmers of hope as well.
Kerry.
Yeah, I'm going to extend that feeling of hope and inspiration too, in terms of how quickly within one generation, if you expose young people and children at an early age to those opportunities so that it becomes something that is accessible, but also just normal to them, that they feel comfortable with at a very young age, then I think that actually they don't come with those chip on the shoulders that, you know, the rest of us well-meaning have all of this extra sort of baggage, whereas as long as they're able to see that this is something that they can do as children, then I think it really will make a positive impact in that one generation. We just need to keep creating those opportunities and making sure that what they are seeing is much more representative. So yeah, I'm hopeful if we represent our local community at London Zoo, it won't be long before the workforce is representative of that local community.
Fredo.
To add on all those excellent points, I think especially on social media, we've seen over the last few years there's been a big push, and there is this discussion going strongly. And I think and I want to hope that the younger generation will not tolerate anymore some aspect of the STEM world that's considered traditional and instead are just toxic. So I'm hoping that they can do what we have failed to achieve, and we can support them in that.
Very true. Clio. Are you on mute?
Yeah, I got it. I'd agree with all of that. And yeah, I think what we've done really well so far is start to articulate what it is that we want, which I think is very helpful. You know, there's people who've been starting to, yeah, like Karen was saying, a lot of momentum is building. And whether or not that fades away is another matter, but there's at least the articulation of where we're trying to get to is out there in public, and people have started to try and make some commitments towards that. The thing I would add is, like, you know, there's been some kind of mixed optimism, mixed confidence here among some of the panelists, but I think the thing that I want to add is, like, we can only do so much without more structural changes around things like funding and policy and how resources are allocated for work on EDI and for provision of science in schools, for provision of STEM engagement activities. Until those things are just generally, like, better thought through, more equitably distributed, then there is only so much that our organisations can do. So I think some of the policy and advocacy work that James was talking about, that a few of us are involved in, is just going to be really important for driving this forward. Otherwise, it's just going to, like, tweak the dial a little bit rather than a big shift.
Thank you very much. Just to remind our audience that you can ask any question to any of our panel members using the Q&A function. Following on this, there's another question that we were keen to get you to answer, which is based on your experience or what you've read and what you've seen so far, who would you say are the communities or group of people that are really often overlooked by science communication initiative, given the current portfolio of science initiative in the UK? Who wants to take a stab at this? Yeah, Clio.
Yeah, I can go for I wouldn't say it's a particular community of people, but as I mentioned with the all-party parliamentary group and some of the work we're trying to organise there, the thing that we've been trying to address is trying to be a bit more intersectional and trying to build in people's kind of multiple identities and multiple experiences of science, because I think what we found is that it's not that one group's been overlooked, but things have been traditionally just focused on one or possibly two characteristics. Sometimes you'll see kind of gender and ethnicity, or ethnicity and its socioeconomic disadvantage. But when you're thinking about how experiences map across all kind of forms of advantage and disadvantage in society, it's really hard. But I think that's where we've got to go next, rather than focusing on one particular group and boosting them up.
So just to give context, I think the question comes from the fact that every single presentation has made a slightly different point as to how scientists should engage with the public. You know, some people would say, well, go and talk to the young one because they really matter.
Okay, right.
And I think for a scientist that has some interest in helping diversifying the STEM workforce, there's a real question as to what is the best time, how to best support that agenda through science communication. Where do they go? Where should they go? What should they prioritize? So would that be it? That's where the question comes from. Karen.
I think actually it brings together thoughts that Clio's articulated and you yourself have just now, Natalie, which I don't think that we miss out any one group in a significant way. But I do think that we often don't talk about our own bias when we're developing science communication. So it comes back to the idea of, well, it's better to work with primary children because they've already made decisions at secondary level, without acknowledging that lots of people don't really like working with secondary school children because they're a little bit more challenging to deal with. And I speak as a secondary school teacher. I think they're brilliant. But the number of people you speak to, oh, I'd rather do primary children because they're just nicer to work with. And I think it's the same issue across the different stages. I think we need multi-interventions at multiple stages and in different ways for different people. But I think we also need to acknowledge sometimes we're working with primary children, not because it's too late, it's because it's nicer for us to work with them, or whether we're working with adults because whatever reasonings we might have for working with adults. And I think that's something that we're never quite open enough about.
Clio, I see you nodding and raising your hand.
Yeah, I was going to say exactly the same as Karen when you clarified that question. I think actually looking at our own motivations, why this work is important to you personally, what you are hoping to get out of it, or how it aligns with your organization's objectives, helps you make that decision on a kind of on that individual scale. If I'm giving a piece of advice to a scientist who wants to go out and do some communication that helps further diversity and inclusion in their field, then that's what I would say to them. Just think about exactly why it is that you want to do it and go from there. Whereas, yeah, when you're thinking about these bigger picture policy and structural changes, it's sometimes harder to tie all of that in together. But yeah, I'd agree with what Karen said as well. Like, actually, if it's a choice between doing nothing and doing something that's just basically what you would enjoy doing and feel like you have the capacity to do, then just go ahead.
I'm guessing that ties up with the role model. So if you are talking to a community that you can identify to, because your motivation also comes because you are part of that community, you absolutely know what they are facing, you're much more likely to become a role model and build a connection with your audience just based on that. Danny.
This isn't really like who is the most under targeted, but what I've really found from moving to London from outside London is that I really think there's just an over everything in the UK. There's an over focus on London and the areas around London, and it would be really nice to see more initiatives. And this is starting to happen at the BES, as we've been talking about this a lot. Bringing more science communication to communities outside of London, who often just don't get as much funding or as much, you know, interest. And, you know, being from Birmingham, that's something I've really felt a lot with a lot of science communication initiatives. So I think it's starting to happen now, but I think historically there's been too much of a London focus. So it's really nice to see things moving more out into other areas of the UK.
And Syrian.
I just wanted to pick up on your point about role models, and it's so important that the people, that the communities that we're trying to reach, that it's the person who's, you know, bringing the science to them actually is something that they can relate to. And that's fine. We've got, you know, but it does put pressure on those minority groups within the science community. So, for example, in academia, you know, we all are encouraged to do some sort of science outreach.
Yeah, if you don't move, because I think moving through the stuff it makes huge sound on top of what you're saying. So if you just don't move, it's fine. Are you up? Oh dear, I think we might have. Right. Whenever she comes back, we'll go back to her point. But while we're doing that, I know that Isla has a question for you on the Q&A. Is that right, Isla?
Yes, we've got one come up now, which says, sometimes it seems there's a reluctance of scientists to simplify their language to help people understand complex issues. Do you think that in trying to reach out to adults, that the language used by scientists needs to be better articulated to those without STEM backgrounds? Alfredo?
I think Dani put her hands up faster than me, so.
I just wanted to say that there are really inventive ways to integrate quite complex scientific language into your science communication, and as long as you explain it well, people are really appreciative of that. I've 100%, like when we published our books, we just used the terms that we would use as scientists, and then we just put this glossary in the back that explained what they all meant, and people like really liked that aspect of it. And so I just think it's about being creative and inventive and making sure that, you know, yes, you do use simpler language when it's appropriate, but also introducing people into the scientific language and making sure you explain it properly. There's no reason to not use that language where it's appropriate and where people would appreciate it. That people don't want to be patronized. So there's a fine balance, but I think you can be inventive and sort that out. And that's one thing that I've really enjoyed doing as an author.
If we go to Alfredo.
Absolutely agree. It's both working as a science journalist and doing so much science communication. People appreciate that you don't just simplify everything in a way that it doesn't make sense. You can talk to them in the complex term. What it's necessary is just sort of getting rid of the complex and abstract structure of what you find so often in scientific, informal scientific writings. So if you take your time in explaining the concept and making interesting, telling people why these things it's fun or important or groundbreaking, and you let them on a sort of story, on a journey, you can use the complex term. I think what is key is that you just don't assume that they must know everything or they have to be super prepared. Less assumption and more creativity in how you approach this.
Great, thank you. James, I could see you've used the hand button as well.
I think Clio was also before me. So,
Right, Clio, if you want to go ahead.
I've spoken a lot, so I'll be very quick. Yeah, I was going to say exactly the same as Alfredo about building a bit of using narrative as a device for that, and that can be really effective. But also, yeah, to try not to make too many assumptions as well. And I saw quite an interesting example recently around the phrase net zero, which just has become like part of, you know, people talk about it on the news all the time, but it's actually just a term that loads of people just don't know what it is. Like, and there's just this assumption that everyone knows what net zero is now because they've heard the phrase so many times, but people just don't. And so it is, yeah, even when terms kind of start, you feel like they're familiar and that within kind of public discussion, just taking the time to put a glossary together, as Danny said, I think is very helpful for people.
And James, should we go back to you?
Yeah, I mean, kind of on that phrasing point, I think there are some words that are used within a scientific context that are also used within a wider context that kind of mean different things. So I think, I mean, sort of reflecting on the pretty awful last year and a bit, the word uncertainty is one of those things. So I mean, obviously it's used in a different context within science, but I think uncertainty in other contexts means people don't know, whereas in science, obviously it reflects on you can never be 100% certain. And so some of those differences, I think, perhaps probably actually over the last year maybe helped have been articulated in a way in which lots of people wouldn't have been as familiar with before. And I think so sometimes those subtle differences can be quite important, and just making sure that people feel comfortable with terms they might be familiar with, but in a sort of scientific context.
Thanks, James. How about Nick?
Sorry, I was just going to add that so analogies can also be really, really powerful, but you have to be careful to tailor those analogies to the audience that you're talking to, because different things will mean different things to different people, particularly people who experience the world in different ways, say people who are hard of hearing or have a vision impairment. You can use analogies to sort of to bolster that more complex scientific language and sort of get ideas across. But yeah, you do have to have a few tricks up your sleeve, I guess, to use the right analogy for the right audience.
Yeah, that's very true. And Kerry.
Yeah, I think it's just important, we've used the word, making sure people are comfortable, obviously not wanting to patronize people, but if a definition of accessibility is how easy something is to understand, really start off from a place that we're putting people in a comfortable position and making sure that they can understand, and just asking them if they can doesn't mean somebody will automatically say yes. My mechanic speaks to me in a different language, and you know, I think when we're in a particular sector, and you know, if that's a type of bias that we carry into our everyday conversation, that our way of even trying to make it more simplified actually still might not be quite at the level that those people are coming at if it literally is brand new to them. So yeah, I think we do need to be really mindful of how we engage. I get very scared talking to some serious scientists, just gonna say.
And I know that Syrian is finally back on track on the technology front. So I'm going to go back to this discussion about how you choose where to engage and how to engage with the public about science. So Syrian.
Sorry, can you hear me now? Is that better? Okay, right. Sorry about that. Yeah, so what was I going to say? I can't remember now. I think it was about how who is communicating the science. And as a scientist in academia, it's doing science outreach is a bit of a tick box still. It's not really valued. So if we really want role models from those specific minority groups to be investing the time to go out and speak to the communities that we want to reach, we feel strongly that we need to have a particular role model that they can relate to, then we need to value science communication, science outreach a lot more in academia. And you know, on your appraisal form every year, you would have a box to say what you've done for outreach this year, but it can just be one thing. Oh, I gave, you know, a 10-minute talk to some school kids, and that's valued as much as you know, I've devoted, you know, a day a week for the last year to, you know, doing some online chats with some with a minority community. So I think we really need to revisit how we value science communication in academia.
Well, actually, that does fit very well to a question that we had for all of you, which is what can institution actually do better to support staff with outreach work? Because there's quite, as you were saying, Syrian, there's quite a disconnect from time to time between the vision and the practicality of getting scientists to also engage with outreach. Anyone has an idea as to what we should recommend institutions to do? Yes, Nicola.
So definitely, I mean, employing somebody who's an expert in public engagement and outreach, but sometimes also a scientist, not necessarily though, who can advise academics and help them communicate their science better, I think is really, really important. Because I know it's happening less and less, but definitely in the past, a lot of institutions have sort of expected their academics and their researchers to do public engagement and outreach in their spare time. And so it's always something that's on top of all of the other work that they're already doing. It's usually something they're not paid to do. It's just something that they do because they enjoy. So having somebody who can help with that, but also having somebody whose job it is to communicate, sometimes on behalf of those researchers, yeah, can just, it makes the quality of what's being delivered a lot better a lot of the time.
Karen.
I'm going to let Danny disagree with me on this one once I've said it, because she sits on our public engagement working group. I think from the BES's point of view, so obviously we're not an institution in terms of being able to direct what scientists do or how they're appraised, but what we are in a position to do is to bring together scientists who may be the only person working on that particular discipline in their university. And that gives us a real opportunity to build collaborations and really use those collaborations to reach out in a way that reduces the workload on individuals, but actually increases the impact. And I think that's quite a powerful tool that we're quite good at using, but I think we could be better at using. That's just the sheer impact of collaboration across the board, and remembering that science is so broad a discipline that people can't hear all of that engagement all the time. And I come back to one of the big challenges as a secondary school teacher, where you're being bombarded by the Society for Microbiology and the British Ecological Society and the Royal Society of Chemistry. And as a teacher, you can't engage with all these bits of science on behalf of your students. It worked because they all came together and said, well, here's some education resources. We've already put them all together for you. And that might be a more constructive way of reaching out to the public. And it's pretty much the only thing we can do as the BES, but maybe it's underutilized by universities.
But it is true that the channeling the enthusiasm is something we don't think about in a way too, because there's a lot of programs that also encourage scientists to build direct relationship with schools through, for example, the Royal Society program. And it has, I know that I did it some years ago. It has been quite a shock to suddenly realize that everything that I thought was quite interesting to talk about, because it wasn't linked to the curriculum, was basically just dismissed. So, and it can go badly for the teachers in the schools, thinking, why are they talking to me about all of this? It's not helping my performance and the kids going their grades, etc. And it can demotivate the scientists, thinking, well, I can't help, so maybe it's not for me. Danny, I see your hand raised, and then Syrian. You unmute? Unmute.
This kind of builds on what Karen was saying, but I do agree with what you said, Karen. So don't worry. I think bringing people together is really, really important. And I think sometimes what institutions forget is that actually sometimes it's not about bringing academics who work in a discipline together or bringing in more academics. It's about, as Nicholas said, it's about bringing in people with expertise in communication, because it's not always academics that are the experts in communication. And I think sometimes we expect academics to do everything, and we don't have time to do that. I mean, sometimes I just feel like I'm drowning, juggling all the science communication and my day job. And I think it helps to have specific roles that are for communication and to hire people specifically off the back of their communication skills. And I think that would take the pressure off everyone. So I think that's what I would personally like to see more of. Maybe a bit biased, but.
Syrian.
I think it would be absolutely lovely if we could have a dedicated science communicator or facilitator of somebody who can facilitate our communication of our science in an academic environment, departments. But I don't think that's where universities are going to put their money. And so I think one solution, coming back to how we can encourage people to do it more, and a more diverse group of people to do the science communication in academia is to build it into the sort of contribution workload model. In the same way that we make sure that our lecture loads, our teaching loads are equally spread across members of an academic department. Why don't we do the same for things like science communication? I mean, not everybody enjoys standing up in front of a bunch of kids and enthusing about their science, but we can all write, and we could all do, there's so many different ways of engaging these days. It doesn't have to be the standing on a soapbox, for example, a performance. It doesn't always need to be a performance. There are lots of ways of communicating that. And then just a second point I wanted to make, picking up on the schools thing and the difficulty of really as a scientist trying to go into school and offer. I've done that. I've tried to offer my enthusiasm, my expertise, my passion to share it with the kids, and it's so hard to get the teachers to find time to make space for the scientists to come in, and ultimately we give up. And I've probably tried a lot harder than many people would have done. I keep knocking at the door, going, can I come and do some insect trapping with you? And it's really hard, and it ends up being sort of squashed into a very small amount of time. So I think there's obviously a problem with the way the curriculum is so packed, and what Nathalie was saying about if you're offering something that isn't aligned in the curriculum, then you're not really, they haven't got time to accommodate you. And I think we should be revisiting the way that we educate our kids, because there should always be time and space for science above and beyond the curriculum.
So I have to say, before I give the floor to Clio and Kerry, that there's this really nice initiative called Inspire the Future that I think has found a really nice way to tackle this problem. And in a way, it's a platform where they have scientists, they have school, and it's the teacher contacting you for a very specific. And when it's bottom up like that, when the school drives the demand, it is a much smoother way to start interacting with your local school. And they match local school with local speaker, which means that you can then use that to build slowly. But yes, I think there's way more that could be done to start to foster those relationships when they are possible. Clio.
So a couple of things I wanted to mention, just picking up just on what Siriam was just saying there, is about the kind of breadth of opportunity of science communication, and that assumption that like the only thing you can do is to kind of stand up and talk about your work in front of a big group of people, which it is I think a diversity and inclusion issue, because number one, a lot of spaces where that happens are not accessible to people with physical disabilities, and actually for people with other forms of disability that mean that they do not feel comfortable in crowded spaces or whatever. So number one, I think we do need to just work on like the breadth of activities that we're offering, things that don't require people to travel. I think the pandemic's been pretty good for that, actually, remote engagement, and also for people that are maybe just naturally introverted. There's nothing, there's no protected characteristic there. They just don't want to do it. So yeah, I think that's quite important. And then the other thing I wanted to mention was, which is kind of more of a, not necessarily related to my BSA work, but other work and other interests, is around training that we offer researchers. And I think, again, at the moment, the setup in most universities is that, you know, you'll get one science communication training course, and that's enough to see you through an entire career's worth of going and providing activities and events and engagement opportunities for people. And I just think that's not good enough, and that there needs to be a bit more of a kind of training pathway for people to practice and develop those skills and take them into different settings, because otherwise it is going to be the case, like Karen was talking earlier, that people stay in the comfort zone of primary engagement and don't really do anything else. I'll stop there because I think some of you have noticed my cat is going a bit mental in the back.
Everybody has met
crazy.
Kerry.
I just wanted to take the opportunity to showcase and sort of wave the flag for mentoring as well. We work with our local education business partnership and Westminster City Lions. So we provide mentoring to a number of young people at secondary school or colleges. So again, maybe a niche for those people that feel less comfortable with sort of public speaking on a larger scale, or kind of any scale really, and more comfortable with one-to-one, and obviously doing it through a formal avenue, working with local authorities. Then any of those concerns people may have around safeguarding and things like that are taken care of, because I know that can obviously feel quite a barrier for people wanting to engage with young people. A lot of people will automatically go to those safeguarding concerns. So yeah, I think there are a huge number of mentoring opportunities out there for people. And yeah, that would be my one.
Karen.
I just wanted to put one final shout out for teachers, because I think that we talk about engaging with young people all the time. And if we engage with a small group of young people, that will have impact for them. But actually teachers are working with them day in, day out. And actually, if we can really work better with teachers, that has impacts long after we've left the premises, over the rest of the year group, the rest of the school, and then next year's cohort. And I think one of the big barriers is that it's really difficult to get funding to engage with teachers, because, well, that's teacher training, nobody wants to fund it. It's really difficult to get the recognition, because if you had real impact, if you're talking to 10 teachers instead of 30 kids. But they're a really, really underused resource, and they are secondary teachers are scientists first and foremost, who moved into a type of science communication teaching. And often our primary teachers are really keen to engage their children with fun and quite often science-based activities. So I think there's a fundamental gap in science communication to teachers that we haven't yet really tapped into. We did a few years ago through the Science Learning Centres, and teachers responded really well to the ability to be scientists with scientists, talking about how to cascade that learning to young people. And maybe that needs to be revisited.
That's very good point. Now, Isla, I know you have a question that relate to those discussions about outreach, value of outreach, and how sometimes it can actually backfire in terms of inclusion.
Yeah, we've kind of touched on it a little bit already, which is that someone has said, we've heard this week from initiatives and organisations such as Soapbox Science and Pride in STEM that rely a great deal on the volunteer or unpaid work of underrepresented people in STEM, such as women, LGBTQ+, disability, ethnic minorities. Is there a way these great schemes can be included in the working day or contract institutions, and should there be? So I know some of you already answered, but if anyone else wants to jump in on that one.
Yes, Alfredo.
Well, yes, please do give us money. No, it would be great to have more support, and yes, we are completely volunteered, run, etc. I think it's one of the things, at least for LGBTQ visibility. I feel that there was always going to be, even if at some point, I don't know, I don't have any rich uncles to leave lots of money, but we win at the lottery, I don't know, and we can have a more structured and a more formal way to do this. I think there will still very much rely on volunteers, on people that want to use their skills, they want to communicate, they want to make sure that they see, by putting themselves out there as role models, they can help other people like them. And it would be nice that if there were more organizations. They don't have to support us, but doing things similar to us, and providing more spaces and more events and more special days to highlight the barriers and to highlight the people in those organizations and elsewhere that once in a while deserve the spotlight. So I think it would be great if us and so many other organizations get the support, but I think if organizations just want to start by being better in supporting their people that they have there and do more stuff, I think that is already a big win.
Yes, thanks, Alfredo. I think Clio.
Yeah, I was going to say exactly the same. I wrote in the question as well. I think it's an action for employers and for funders to support the organizations that are trying to create those opportunities. I think as well, like it's, you know, reliance on volunteers is a massive thing across all STEM engagement and across a lot of organizations that are not inclusive to the groups that people like Pride in STEM or Soapbox Science. You know, there's a lot of activity that those are the only places that some researchers can go, and I think it's really important that they continue to exist, and they shouldn't have to, you know, they shouldn't be the only, you know, they shouldn't be the only ones answering questions about why they rely on volunteers, because I think it's very, very widespread, and yeah, something that, again, it's a structural thing across the whole science communication area, that all of us can raise it as an issue, but then there's only so far, you know, until, as Alfredo said, we all come across like a lot of money. And I say that someone from a relatively well-funded organization still is, you know, only stopped relying on volunteers a few years ago. So.
Okay, I see Danny, did you have a point on this one?
Yeah, I think there's two answers to it really. Either it gets written into people's job roles as their day job as a scientist, or you get paid. Like I think it's really challenging. I think we're in a really challenging landscape in science where academics are really, really used to and expect to do things for free outside of their day job. And it can make it really hard to make a living as a science communicator, as just a science communicator, because you've got many, many academics that are essentially willing to do your job for free. And it is a challenge, and it is something you have to think about whenever you take part in any event. And I always do strive my hardest not to undercut people that do this as their day job. I think the really key thing is about what is included within an academic role, and having organizations like Soapbox and Pride in STEM that work acknowledged as part of being an academic. And it's what we've touched on before about having that acknowledgement, because I think the only real other solution is to pay. And obviously, you know, these wonderful organizations, you can't pay everyone that takes part. You just don't have the funding, sadly. Wouldn't that be great? So yeah, I think that's kind of where it's always fallen for me. And it is a real challenge. And we see that across sectors in publishing, that we have academics just write books for free. So trying to earn a living as an author doing any sort of educational book is very, very hard, because the margins, they just don't give you any money. So yeah, I think it's something to think about across sectors. And it's about us as academics thinking what is our role and what is our worth, as well as making sure that that's written into our roles as scientists.
Thanks, Danny. And Karen?
I just wanted to add on to that, because I think it's a really interesting point. So for background, the British Ecological Society has quite a large team of staff, but obviously a huge amount of work is undertaken by volunteers. And over the last few years, we've certainly heard from the membership what the impact of volunteering really has on them and how they feel about that. And I'm in the process right now of thinking about, well, how do we recognise and value member contributions? But one of the things that's become really obvious really, really quickly is that two people doing the same activity as a volunteer, it actually is a very different ask, because one may be a researcher within a Russell Group university who's got really clear support and really clear institutional level recognition of doing that work. And then a different person, maybe on a teaching focused contract in a post-92 university, and the assumption is that all that voluntary work is irrelevant and isn't recognised at all. And that makes it really, really challenging to come up with a consistent way of recognising all those voluntary contributions, because we're working within this much, much bigger landscape. There's no answer. I'm telling you this because if you have any answers, I'd love to know them. And it's taking an awful lot of time and effort and conversation to think about, what does volunteering really mean for an individual? Who's doing the volunteering? In terms of, we know that we see women tend to do a lot more volunteering for certain types of activities than others, and what does that mean across the board from an equity point of view? That wasn't helpful, but I think it was a really important point for us to think about, and if you want to help and get involved, let me know. It's not paid.
Thanks, Karen. I've got one more question from the chat, but does anyone want to jump in on that one we just had, or is that everyone?
I just want to add, as someone who has volunteered a lot of my time to the BES and also done soapbox science, that I did actually get an awful lot out of it after me being like, either you pay us or you acknowledge it. The experience has been wonderful, so maybe I should backtrack a bit on that.
Oh, that's good to hear. Okay, I'll move on to another question we have, which is, there's been a theme this week that, at least in the UK, the school curriculum needs to be adjusted by the government with regards to STEM. Any recommendations for any parents or students on how they would help lobby schools and or the government for these changes? Karen?
So I feel like I'm being really, really intrusive, so please feel free to shut me up. I do know from a STEM point of view, the Institute of Physics, the Royal Society of Chemistry and the Royal Society of Biology have all been working on kind of curriculum frameworks. And biology is a really good example, because that's where people have really had to come together to prioritise what and when students should be learning certain content. And it's always tense, because every little section of biology everybody thinks is really important and needs to be in the curriculum. You know, I think you can teach the whole of biology from an ecological perspective. A whole other bunch of people think you can teach it from an evolutionary or a biochemist. Do we really need biology because we're just bags of chemicals anyway type of perspective. But actually it's really quite hard. So if people want to engage, they really need to engage through the Royal Society of Biology's curriculum framework, and likewise the Royal Society of Chemistry's and the Institute of Physics.
Thanks, Karen. Doesn't look like we have anyone else that wants to jump in on that one. So maybe we go back to Nathalie.
Yes, well, I think we're going to end up soon this event. So I'm going to start, I'm going to finish this event maybe with, for all of you, a 1-minute answer to a simple question, which is, I'm hoping that this video will be watched by people that want to maybe start get into science communication, or interested in EDI issues in STEM, and really are starting to consider doing some public engagement work to try to help those EDI issues. What kind of advice would you give them? Where do they start? What kind, any kind of advice that you may have for those people that may take the plunge? So I'll start. I'd like to have an answer from all of you, so I'll start in order. So Kerry.
I guess from my own personal experience, and yeah, in terms of the organisation I'm at, I'm actually going to, it loops into the previous question that I stayed quiet for, but I do think volunteering is a fantastic way for people to just give something a try. So yeah, I'm keen to create more opportunities across the board. We have a lot of teachers who started volunteering with us last year. We made the most of them not going off for 6 weeks summer holidays, and offered them great opportunities to get involved in creating our new program. So yeah, so I think that's where I would encourage people to look for opportunities.
What about you, Alfredo?
My advice is two advice. One is to follow a lot of people that do this because I think it's very important to understand sort of the landscape, but also in a way to get a finger on the pulse on how things should be discussed, etc. And the other thing is just be creative, trying to find new angles, new way to talk about what you want to talk.
Thank you very much. Danny?
I think my advice for anyone looking to get into science communication or just starting out in science communication is just be unapologetically yourself. Don't hold back for anyone. Like, people will like you for you. They like your personality. That's what people want to see in a scientist. Just don't temper yourself. I think that's why I've had the success I have had, is because I just let myself be excited and a giant nerd, and that's absolutely fine. And lean into whatever characteristics you have that you enjoy and you're proud of. And I think that's the most important thing.
Karen, maybe something on where to start also, as if you're faced with this landscape of opportunity, how do you start your journey?
I think that there is no one best way to start. I think it's really, really challenging. Science communication is really broad and really diverse. It has a huge number of different audiences that you can engage with, and you will like some of them more than you like working with others. So I think it's a matter of dipping your toe into other people's organised science communications plans, finding out what you love doing most, and then starting to get creative and developing your own ideas. But Danny's right. What we love most from science communicators is that they are themselves and they love their science more than anything else. They just love their science, and you can't stop them talking about it. And that's okay too.
Nicola?
Yeah, so just to add to that, I think, yeah, if you're passionate about what you want to talk about, it's going to be really, really easy to talk about that, and that'll come across and it'll be very endearing to the audience that you want to speak to. I talked about this a little bit yesterday, but I really think that if there's a particular audience that you have in mind that you want to engage with, talking to that audience from the very beginning as you build up your plans about how you want to engage, how you want to communicate, is really, really crucial, because you'll actually find that that audience will help you shape the way that you communicate, the kinds of language that you use, the analogies you use, and it will improve the quality of what you want to talk about, and it'll improve the delivery. It'll improve the way that that audience appreciates what you're talking about.
Very wise advice. James?
I think I'd say it in terms of maybe where to start, and then quite an intimidating, potentially, you think, where do I even go? I think actually the UK has a really rich array of learned societies and professional bodies, and I know we've heard a lot about them today, but I think they are wonderful vehicles to supporting that, whether it's through their own internal committees or whether that's through their own activities that they undertake. So I think finding your learned society professional body within your research discipline is a really good resource and good way to get an idea of what is out there and what you could potentially get involved in.
And Syrian?
So I think first I'd say that if you're a scientist and you think you're not a science communicator, then you're wrong, because we all have to communicate in order to get our science out there to even if it's just to our own scientific communities. And so you're already a good communicator because you're already doing science. So it isn't a huge step to take it that little bit further. So I guess I'm thinking more of the audience that I might speak to about, maybe students who are thinking of how can I get into science communication? Well, how about when you have a paper published, or you've got a really cool experiment that worked in the lab, or you've been on an amazing field trip? Don't wait to be asked to communicate it, just get on and do it. So you can write a blog. Twitter is incredibly powerful. So I recently had a paper accepted, and I thought, oh, it's not a really amazing paper, but I'll just write a Twitter story about it. And I was amazed that many more people read that tweet, that thread of tweets, than who will ever read the paper. And for me, that was like, oh wow, I communicated my story, my science, over Twitter, and I'd not done that before. I'm active on Twitter, but I'd never tried to really have a sort of long thread. And so there's so many ways to communicate science. If you don't want to stand out there on a soapbox or be in front of those kids, you can do it in all sorts of ways. So just get out of your, you're not out of your comfort zone. You're already communicating your science. It's just a slightly different way of doing it.
And Clio.
Yeah, so I'm going to say, something slightly different or kind of complementary to what people are saying, which is really know your motivations and goals. So start from that rather than what activity you think you might want to do. So knowing why it's important to you and what kinds of things you're working towards, what kind of changes you would like to see. So if it is encouraging people into science careers, and actually then why is that important to you? Is it because you feel like the careers system at the moment is unequal, or is it just because you personally feel like you've got a lot to contribute? So just continuing to ask yourself why science communication is important to you will really help you then understand where to focus your attention and your precious time and activities. Then the activities kind of fall quite naturally from that, and then you sort of know, okay, well, if once you know why it's important, then you can start to understand a little bit more like what you should be doing. And then the other thing I'd say is just to build a network of one or two people that you sort of know a little bit already and that are close to you and that can support you a bit, because sometimes it can feel like you're the only one doing this work, especially if you're in a large organization or a large department of people doing lots of different things all the time.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you everyone for those 4 days. From our point of view, it has been a blast to hear about what everyone is doing to connect different ideas, different dots, and really have you so engaged during that discussion, which was also, I can't believe that we were originally worried about making an hour of panel discussion, and actually we ran over. So thank you very much, and have a lovely afternoon. Thank you.